Hello and welcome back to And That's a Fact, the show where we take our subjective opinions and turn them into definitive, objective fact. I'm Neil Adamson.
And I'm Rick Papandrea.
And today we are covering our final four for our Disney bracket that you guys have been voting on. We are in the home stretch here. We just got really one or two more videos to get through this, and it's getting down to see, it's really kind of interesting, I think, who is in this final four, because one of these final four is going to end up being crowned the champion of Disney.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting group for that.
It absolutely is. I'm looking at an old list here, and I was just suddenly afraid that I didn't remember who got through. So just for my peace of mind, let's go through very quickly and say who's going up against each other, because Neil didn't make a new graphic for me this week.
Sorry. And as you guys know, if you've been watching along, I know the results for this week. Rick does not. So
That's correct.
You guys will be he'll be reacting as he learns. So our first match, we just had two matches because we're in the final four. So our first match was our champion of the contemporary bracket, the Lion King, versus our champion of the classic bracket, Peter Pan. So Lion King was a number 4 seed. Peter Pan was a number 14 seed.
And the champion of our Pixar bracket, which was Toy Story,
Yep.
it went up against the champion of our post-millennial bracket, we've been calling it, which was Moana.
Yep.
So that's also going to be another a great matchup. Interestingly, we have two completely computer-animated films going up against two traditionally animated films. Lion King has some computer assistance in it, we'll say, but it's still a hand-drawn animation. And after today, we're looking at just the final matchup. We're going to find out who's going into the final matchup today, the championship, and that'll be the last thing you guys have to vote on in this bracket.
Yep. Yeah, so we're really getting into it. And I think when you look at these films, because to be honest, I was a little surprised that this was our final four.
Yes. Which one surprised you the most?
Well, Peter Pan.
Oh, I think it's obvious, yeah.
Peter Pan. Although in my personal bracket I had chose Peter Pan, but I never once thought that it was going to make it there.
That surprised me as well. That we have three of the most classic princess movies in one quadrant, and none of them made it through, is really surprising to me.
Well, and Lion King's not a princess movie either. And
that's true.
And neither is, and Pixar doesn't do that. And then Moana is a princess movie-ish, and
it kind of subverts the princess genre. But you're right. In the contemporary bracket, we had Beauty and the Beast. Belle, Pocahontas, Mulan. Who am I missing? I thought that was another one.
In the contemporary.
Oh, and Jasmine. And none of them was the princesses did not make it as far as I thought they would. I thought that they would have a much better showing.
Yeah, and we talked about this with Peter Pan too, but with both Lion King and Peter Pan, neither of them had the princess bump that we talked about before.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they were able to make it as far as they did without that princess bump, when they went into those final rounds for their brackets, for their sub-brackets, it was like, well, they had that. You could see that as a disadvantage because they didn't have a princess bump, but it was almost an advantage that they got that far without that princess bump. So there must have been something that was pushing them there, and obviously that pushed them into the final four. And now they're headed up against each other for this final semifinal.
Yeah, if I can try my hand at a sports analogy, it's like the princess movies are a team with one really great player, and they kind of build the team around that player. But these other movies, Peter Pan and Lion King, are teams where the whole team works together really well and becomes kind of greater than the sum of its parts. And so I think that kind of may have really helped. Instead of, movies built around one character or even a pair of characters, obviously Peter Pan is, I mean, like all movies have a protagonist, but they're not hinging on this, oh, it's a princess movie, so people will like it. It just, it needed to be a good movie.
Well, and it's funny because Lion King is actually a Prince movie, right?
Right, yeah, it absolutely is.
And it was very much, we talked about before, like, Little Mermaid was like the girl movie, and Lion King was the boy movie. And I don't think we necessarily look at it as rigid nowadays as we did, like, back in the 90s when they came out, but they very much fit into those kind of stereotypes.
Yeah, for those of you who are younger than us, you probably don't remember a time, unless they still do it, but it would surprise me if they did, where when you went to McDonald's and got a Happy Meal, you had to specify if you wanted a boy's toy, which was a car,
they still do,
or a girl's toy. Maybe do they?
I think so.
Maybe they just have.
But I'm not sure.
Interesting. That kind of surprises me.
Yeah.
To be honest, but like that was definitely a thing, in the '90s where it was. Did you want the car or the princess? Was kind of what it boiled down to.
Well, and so with Lion King, we talked about before, we talked about it when we were talking about Tarzan and Hercules and stuff like that. Lion King really does... It's interesting because I thought that we would see either Aladdin or Beauty and the Beast in this Final Four for the contemporary bracket.
Yeah,
that was my thought all along.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes sense, because, Beauty and the Beast is 2, Aladdin was 3, and Lion King was 4. I thought that whichever made it past, if it was Beauty and the Beast or Aladdin, it would be a close match, but it would beat out Lion King, for a lot of reasons, but, those seeds...
Yeah, and that's basically what we saw, like what you just said with the seeds, like, you had, the number 2 seed, Beauty and the Beast, was the one that I thought was going to take it.
Me too, absolutely.
I thought
and not
Aladdin,
just because it's the 2 seed, but because it seems like everybody loves that one. And it made it very far. They do, obviously. But
when The Lion King ended up winning, it was kind of this realization that, we had been talking about everything that it had working in its favor, how well-rounded it was, how it took all of these different Disney tropes that Disney had been doing for years and put them all into one film in the most perfect way that it could. It wasn't all one thing. Like, Aladdin was very much like comedy all around.
Yeah.
And
when you've got Robin Williams as your sidekick, it's going to be funny. Robin Williams can't not be funny, even in his more dramatic roles. Dead Poets or Good Will Hunting, he has scenes where he just, like, comedy falls out of him and he can't help it. And so Aladdin it's hilarious in large part because of that. And so The Lion King is funny. It has jokes in it, and they're funny jokes, but it also carries more weight, I think, because it's not just a comedy. It's so much more than that. It's all of it.
Well, and then, like, Beauty and the Beast, it's got a much higher level of, like, romance, obviously,
right,
with that story. But, it's not as focused on the other parts of telling, like the comedy.
Right, and Lion King, again, there is romance in Lion King.
There's some great comedic moments in Beauty and the Beast. But basically, the way I see Lion King, and some people could end up seeing it as like a watered down version of everything Disney has done before, but we talked about this and how, like, Hercules was an attempt at doing it all and a failure in my opinion.
Yeah.
But Lion King is an attempt at doing it all and doing it all perfectly sparingly and using it exactly when you need to. And
I should say about Hercules, we've been, like, talking a lot about how terrible Hercules is in Neil's opinion, but there are parts of it that I love. There are some great jokes in there, and the whole character of Meg is awesome. And so, like, just shout out. I mean, I want to reiterate that Hercules is not bad. There's some great stuff in there. There's a joke when one of the kids, they're not actually kids. They're the demon guys that are pretending to be kids. They're trapped under a big boulder. One of them calls out, "Somebody call IXII." That's a great joke. And it just, like, flew past my head as a kid, obviously. And so there's some great stuff in Hercules. I don't think it deserved to get past. I think they landed in a good spot. maybe it's worse than Winnie the Pooh, but people know it better or something. But when we're talking about Hercules in the negative, it's still a Disney movie. Even if it's the worst Disney movie, that's still pretty good for the most part.
And we're talking about it that way because we're talking about the final four of that bracket.
Right.
So we're talking about the
where it
champion
did not
of
deserve
that bracket. And it's not, clearly when you have the other movies in this bracket, it's not that deserving of that. So anyway, we had
Lion King
versus
is
Peter
the
Pan.
winner.
Yeah. Lion King, clear winner. This one was a blowout, 91% to 9%.
Wow, it doesn't surprise me. Peter Pan did well in its bracket, to our surprise, but Lion King is a classic, and that's absolutely what I would have.
Yeah, and I said last week too that Peter Pan was the Cinderella story of that bracket that made it. It became the champion of that bracket, made it to the Final Four, just like Loyola Chicago did this year in March Madness, and it made it to the Final Four.
Everyone
but
knows,
it didn't have what it needed to go against.
Ultimately, Cinderella is defeated and doesn't go on. So it's a Cinderella story exactly.
Yeah. So Lion King moves on to our final, and it will be facing the winner of Moana versus Toy Story. And both of these are 2 seeds. And I think the way that ended up is very fitting because I think for both of them, in their cases, the 1 seeds were a little they weren't as
they were less accessible.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Not as many people saw them. They went over more people's heads. So
especially with children seeing Toy Story, there are some themes in Toy Story that can resonate with adults, but in Toy Story 2, the themes are a lot more grim, and it's it's much more about growing up than it is about a fun adventure, about getting back, reuniting with Andy. And it's we talked about how good the Sarah McLachlan song is, but it is good and it is sad. And even if a kid doesn't understand it, the emotions will still resonate with them. And so I think that people probably walk out of Toy Story 2 feeling much more somber than they would walking out of Toy Story 1, which I think helped Toy Story 1. I think people, for the most part, especially in Western culture, especially in America, are uncomfortable with their emotions, especially when those emotions are negative. Now, being somber or sad is not negative, as we learn in Inside Out. But
another film that I felt should have made it a little further and didn't.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely agree. But I think that people are uncomfortable with it. So it doesn't surprise me that Toy Story went on farther. Again, Zootopia is a movie that makes us confront our own prejudices. Yep. And again, not again, I haven't said this before. Prejudice comes from the Latin prejudging, which everyone does all the time about everything. If you smell food that doesn't smell good to you, you're going to be prejudiced against it. You're going to judge it before you've tasted it. And sometimes prejudice is good in that case. If a car is speeding towards you, you're going to prejudge that situation. Be like, I shouldn't walk into the street right now. That's good prejudice. But interpersonal prejudice, significantly less good. In fact, bad.
In fact, bad.
So Zootopia is one of those movies that makes us confront that, again, in my mind, way less accessible than Moana, and not surprising that Moana goes forward.
So looking at these two now that we're down to Toy Story and Moana, the more accessible ones of their brackets, even though they're not 1 seeds, they're the more accessible. And I think that number 2, 2 seeds is perfect for them. But what I think is interesting about it, going off of what you're saying with the accessibility, is that when you look at these 2 films, it, in my mind, is clear which one's more accessible. Because, to me...
I don't know how you're thinking. You say, I don't know if I could say which one is more accessible, so I don't know which one you're thinking of.
Okay, so to me, I guess when I say accessible, what I'm thinking is more along the lines of, Pixar in general does a really good job of choosing themes, choosing topics that and messages that resonate with adults like really, really strongly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
And in some cases, those Pixar films, those themes, they don't necessarily resonate with younger kids. They might resonate with like a teenager or, you know, a preteen. But
sure,
like
a 7-year-old is
going
going to watch a way different movie when they watch Toy Story 3 than I would, or even like a 15 or 16-year-old would. Absolutely. That's,
or Inside Out even. Like
Sure.
like Inside Out I think actually is it does a really good job of balancing it.
Yes.
But it is
considering
really
the difficultness, that's a word now, of the material, I do think they do a good job of balancing it. But in general, I think you're right. It seems like you're saying that Moana is more accessible for the young audience, under 10.
No, I was going to say the opposite. I was going to say that when looking at it, like for example, Up, and like Up has the Russell character that makes it a little bit more accessible for kids.
Yeah.
And let's see, like WALL-E.
And Doug. Yeah.
Like WALL-E is one of the things that makes WALL-E such a great film is the things that go over kids' heads. You know what I mean?
I mean, there's like a 5-minute dance sequence in WALL-E, and it's beautiful, and and like there's a lot of like emotional stakes in this moment, and kids are just like, oh, pretty. Like it's not going to land with them.
Well, what Pixar usually speaks to is they always speak to something that's at the core of being a human being. And it's usually
without any human beings in the movie.
Yeah, but it's usually about social interaction with one another. That's like kind of their forte is social interaction. But within their films, every one of those films, that's their main thing they focus on. But within that, there's more complex themes woven throughout. And those more complex themes, sometimes, especially as Pixar grew and matured as a company, sometimes those themes matured quite a bit to the point where they would completely go over a kid's head. But back when they did Toy Story, they weren't doing that. They were they were doing the heart of the message that they had. They just focused on that social interaction, and that is so universal to people that are old and young. Even if young kids can't put it into words, can't explain like when they're feeling a certain way, like that feeling of that desire to connect with others is present in you when you're a 3-year-old. Right. You know, as being a human being. Whereas a film like Moana, I think does kind of the opposite of what Pixar usually does, where their focus is more on like a complex idea. And you can distill that idea into a simplified version. So we could say that the idea, like for Moana, is that you need to find your own way in life. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And
but that's not like a concept for little kids.
Right.
Now you can simplify it down for little kids, saying like, oh, you need to be yourself. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
But it's much more mature, and in terms of at the heart of the story, it doesn't really have that heart that is universal.
You know, I realized something as you're talking, as I'm thinking about like accessibility for children. Moana, if we compare the plots of them, the plot of Toy Story is very simple. A new guy comes in, you know, there's interpersonal conflict, and then they're lost. They need to get back to Andy. Very simple. The plot of Moana
they need to overcome their interpersonal conflict in order to do so.
Right. Moana, though, the plot is much more complex. We have, it's sort of like the Odyssey, where she has a little kind of adventures along the way, but there's this overarching plot of needing the heart of Te-Fiti and all this different stuff, and
it's all about her growing as a character, and as a film, it's awesome, but
But for children,
Yeah.
they're going to have a much harder time following. They'll still enjoy, the little coconut guys and the rock singing and the sparkly crab. But they're not going to be able. I mean, some of them will, But depending upon their age, they'll have a much harder time connecting each sort of vignette together to understand the larger movie as a whole.
Now they may come out with one simplified idea, which is that like Moana is a strong woman. You know what I mean?
Or you got to work to accomplish your goal or something. But
which is kind of like in the realm of what the message of the film is, but it's not as precise. And I think that's the difference between Disney Animation and Pixar still. Is that Pixar, when they started, it's kind of like when you go to film school and you're forced to just make like 2-minute shorts. And if you make it longer than 2 minutes, like they won't accept it. Like that's the max, because they want you to be able to tell storytelling as abstracted and as simplified as possible and still get your message across clearly. And Pixar started with a film like Toy Story that did not have a complex plot. Now, it had a lot of really complex, colorful characters, so you really did feel like that world was fleshed out. It didn't feel like boring or simplified. But it was very straightforward, and its message is so accessible to kids because there's not one kid around that's watching that film that's understanding like what's actually going on. Like kids understand at different ages, but if they're actually following the plot, there's not a kid that's following the plot that hasn't had that feeling of kind of jealousy within like friendships or like
imagine kids totally understand being at school, they have friends, suddenly there's a new person at school and oh no, my friends are paying more attention to this new person. Like everyone understands that 100%, or even it doesn't need to be a new person, but my friend is talking more to this other friend of theirs. Boom, jealousy. Like jealousy is one of the first things that children feel as human beings.
And it's also funny because even if you're a kid that doesn't have that many friends, a lot of times you substitute friends for other things. And for most kids, I don't know necessarily about kids nowadays. I would hope that this is kind of the case because I don't think times have changed too much. But I know for like me, it would be, if you weren't interested in social interaction at a particular time, you would be more focused, like you would want to just go play with your toys. And that's what's so brilliant about Toy Story is because even if you don't have the strongest social relationships to create that dynamic in your life, you've already created those
dynamics with your toys. I mean,
which
think
is
about
what
the framing of the movie.
About.
Yeah, I'm just really, this is blowing my mind. Think about the framing of the movie. It opens with Andy playing with his toys and creating relationships that we understand through the lens of a child playing with his toys. And how you couldn't design a more easy way for children to relate to the characters. Oh, they're toys.
Exactly.
These toys. We're playing with these toys together. Like it's absolutely brilliant. And I think it seems like what we're both circling around is that we both think, I think that Toy Story deserves to defeat Moana. Moana's great, but I think that Toy Story is a stronger film. And also, I think that Toy Story, if we pull out and look at the larger picture, Toy Story is more important to the scope of animated films because of its status as first fully animated computer film, 3D animated computer film. I don't know how to say it. I'm not an animator. But it's the first of its kind. And I think that also gives it a boost. So I think Toy Story should win. That's where my vote is. But honestly, Neil, is that, you don't, without giving away the farm here.
Well, here's the thing. I feel like if you're looking at these two films with your adult mind in, then I think there's a tendency, if you really analyze the message of each film, there is a tendency to want to vote for Moana. Because the big thing Moana has working for it that Toy Story doesn't have is the musicals.
That is true.
And
I've said a lot of times that I like the musicals, and I'm voting against one now.
And if you analyze the two of them as an adult and look at their concepts and their themes and their messages and how strong of a film they are, they're very equal. And then you throw the musical thing in on Moana's side,
especially Lin-Manuel Miranda's music.
Yeah. Then you hit a point where, as an adult, Moana might start, edging out Toy Story. But you have to take a step back and say to yourself, you got to put that film school cap on, and be like, maybe this is more acceptable.
Which is as pretentious as possible, in case anyone's wondering.
Well, but
it
it's
says
almost
director
the
on
opposite,
it.
because it's almost like, all right, Terrence Malick versus,
Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
And that's a no-brainer to me.
And if you're putting your adult mind in, your adult cap on, there might be the tendency to be like, well, Terrence Malick,
Right, but then you watch a Steven Spielberg movie and it's just absolute pure fun. You're like, oh, wait. This is kind of, we're getting down to like the argument of film versus movies. But
really, the ability for a movie to do something as universal and as well as Toy Story does, it takes that concept so, it takes it very seriously, and it does it really well. Yeah, so you can't really put it in this popcorn flick. You have to appreciate it for the art that it is, even as simplified as it is. I know people love Mad Max because it's just it's very simplified, and so
it's a simplified plot.
Yeah,
everything else in it is incredibly complex.
I have a lot of problems with Mad Max. That I think it's overrated, but I don't think it's a bad movie. But,
we'll get into. We can do a different video about Mad Max.
But anyway, so I think that it really comes down to who is putting their adult cap on versus who is putting their kid cap on when they're voting.
That's a fair distillation.
And to be honest, I put my adult cap on when I was voting.
You voted for Moana.
I voted for Moana, even though I said last week that no matter who won that one, I would be fine with it.
I don't feel the same way. I am fully leaning Toy Story on this one.
I voted for Lion King the first day that the poll went up. But I waited until way later to vote for Moana because I was still not sure about it. I ended up voting for Moana, but I recognized that this could go either way and I'd be fine with either one because they both kind of deserved it. And what ended up happening is I think this was based on the volume of votes, because we had our most votes, I think, for anything on this one, and it was our closest ever. It was 51% to 49.
Oh, no.
But that was rounding. And Toy Story ended up winning.
Yes.
So
that's so close, though. Oh my gosh.
It was incredibly close, and like I said, I'm totally okay with it, especially because I sat down. When I voted, I still had the adult cap on, but after that, I stepped back and I looked at it from a more analytical position, thinking about all the things we've been discussing now.
Right.
And I totally understand why it moved on. So
51-4, man, that is nuts.
Yeah. So our final match,
championship match,
is going to be Lion King versus Toy Story. And it's funny because you said this last week about their when were they released?
Oh yeah, within 2 or 3 years of each other. They were in production at the same time.
One was 93 and one was 94 or something.
I think it was 94 and 96 or something like that.
I can find out.
94. But I mean, honestly, if I'm looking at this bracket and I have to choose two for it to come down to, I don't know if I could pick a better two than Toy Story and Lion King. These are like, obviously.
So one was 94, one was 95.
Toy Story was 95 and Lion King was 94?
Yep.
Okay, so within a year of each other, we have like almost, 80 years, 70 years of Disney movies. And the championship match comes down to a difference of 1 year.
It was a great time to be alive.
It was. Like, when people say this was the
to
Disney
be a
Renaissance, it was. Like,
Yeah.
this was the late 80s and then into the 90s were, according to our objective bracket, the best time for Disney movies.
Yeah. And a lot of that could be skewed, too, because you're going to have more millennials voting in
We're
these
the people
polls.
voting in the bracket.
So, like, yeah, it can be skewed. But I do think that it's a pretty accurate representation of how people think.
Yeah, I do, too.
They are a number 2 seed and a number 4 seed, so.
Right. And I mean, they're just, I also think that they do a really good job of sort of encapsulating like Disney. Like, if someone was only going to watch 2 Disney movies, those would be really a great 2 to watch.
Yeah.
They would get the 3D animation, they would get the classic animation, they would get a musical with all of the pomp and circumstance of a Disney musical. They'd get a really well-told Pixar story. When you were just saying you didn't you would be happy if either of these won. I am gonna have a really hard time choosing because I would be very happy if either of these won. I mean,
yeah.
Looking forward, obviously, no, we haven't voted yet. But what do you think about this match?
Well, another thing that we haven't touched on with both of these films yet that I think is really important to say, and part of the reason that they got this far, and this is also part of the reason I thought Aladdin would get further and it didn't, is look at the casts for these two films. The casts of these films are the reason that when they came out, everything that they were trying to do with them worked. You know what I mean?
Because we shouldn't forget the cast because we don't see them. I mean, voice actors are actors. They are incredibly talented. It's very hard to do. And I mean,
Jeremy
we have actors
Irons
in these
is
movies.
Scar.
Yeah, singing. Jeremy Irons kind of singing as Scar.
Well, just his voice is so perfect. I remember when they announced him for Alfred, I was like, what? No, he's Scar. Like, he can't be Alfred.
He's never allowed to work again. He's Scar. I mean, James Earl Jones was so good in this movie that when they decided to do a live-action version, they're just like, should we just use James Earl Jones? Yeah, we should just still use James Earl Jones again.
And then you look at the dynamic of Buzz and Woody and Tom Hanks and Tim Allen, and it's like, you couldn't even have a better pairing.
Right, and you never think to put those two together.
Because, there's a lot of comedians out there, right? There's a lot of comedians that have good dynamics with each other.
Yes.
But the difference with these two is that these two are like the dad comics. You know what I mean? They're not the comedians that tell really inappropriate jokes or whatever.
Think not the cool comedians.
they're the funny, they're grilling for you. They're
right.
the.
I mean, think about this. This was also right after Tom Hanks won an Oscar for Philadelphia. Yeah. Right? He had just done this super serious drama about the AIDS crisis. And then turns around and plays this high-strung, narcissistic cowboy toy, puts as much effort into it and as much acting ability and quality into it, and it's so good. Although you just said, is there a better duo? And this isn't a Disney movie, but I want to give a quick shout out to what is maybe a better animated duo, and it's Kenneth Branagh and Kevin Kline in The Road to El Dorado, because that's also a really good animated duo.
Well, I just think of these two characters, especially at the time in the 90s.
Yeah,
these two
they're
actors,
iconic.
They were in Tom Hanks. He never really left a period of success, but
this
was Tim Allen, peak Tim Allen, and
I mean, Home Improvement was like, I don't know, every other night or something.
You had the
you know.
Santa Claus movies, and
Yep.
like, so like this, they were just such a perfect, because we saw them both. Like Tom Hanks was that lovable, like as an actor, like when you
Yes.
saw him, he was just like the happy, like lovable, like dad figure to the world. Like everybody's
Yeah,
talking
it
about him
still
running
is.
for president like now,
Yeah.
because people still see him that way.
Yes.
And then Tim Allen was the TV dad that we were growing up with at the time. And,
Yes.
and it was just
100%.
oh, it was just so perfect.
Yeah, and like, I mean, the rest of the cast in both of them are amazing too, and I don't remember their names, but I mean, you know, the Sarabi, what is the actress that play? I'm totally blanking on her name. Anyway, the whole casts are amazing, and it makes the movies that much better. You know, that these people weren't phoning in their performances, and yeah, you know, I'm gonna have a really hard time picking between these two movies.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to rewatch them. In fact, all of you, we should all watch both of these movies before we vote.
I agree.
To make the
I
most
agree. Like
informed opinion
if
possible.
there's one round to watch the movies that are in the round, it's this one because it's just two.
Right, and they're also like 90 minutes each. You could watch both of them in less time than it would take you to watch the extended Return of the King.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so we'll be starting voting right when this video goes up, and it will be the number 2 seed Toy Story versus the number 4 seed The Lion King,
For
Pixar
the
champ.
ultimate Disney movie, best Disney movie ever. We're gonna decide it. You're gonna decide it.
Yep.
Right now.
Yep.
So vote on it.
So
the link will
we're
be...
really excited about this. We got
Yeah.
one more video to do the Disney bracket, and then next week we will be doing that video. It should be a pretty short one, just going over the winner of that match, and then we will be stay watching next week because we'll be dropping a number of videos that will be starting our
comic book movie bracket.
Yep.
And we'll also put the links for that below because voting is going on now. So vote for your favorite comic book movies. This has been an awesome bracket. We got one more to do, and now we're going to move on to another bracket right out of the gate because we're really enjoying them.
Yeah.
I know we said we're not going to do only brackets, and we're not, but right now they're a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Also, I want to apologize today because I'm coming off of being sick, so
we don't forgive you.
If my voice was sounding really funky, that's why. But I should be good for next week as we dive into all of that fun stuff and finish up this bracket.
So thank you for voting so far, everyone that has. If you haven't yet, there is still time, unless you're watching this in like 2022, in which case there's not still time. But if you're watching this when we upload it, there's still time. Vote in this last match. Tell us, what is the ultimate Disney movie, Toy Story or The Lion King?
It all comes down to this.
Yep.
All right.
This is it. And
Make
I'm
sure
sure
you
that
like and
Tim Allen...
subscribe. Check out our Twitter or Instagram. Those are
all of the links below. Hit the YouTube bell. We make these because we like them, but if we make them in a vacuum, it hurts our feelings.
And it doesn't help. So make sure you're getting out and voting and telling your friends about it. So
yes.
Thank you guys so much. We're coming down to the end, and we are about to establish who is the winner of our Disney, who is the Disney champ right now.
And the two best movies of Disney that we're going to decide between, Lion King and Toy Story, and those are the two best Disney movies that they've ever made. And that's a fact.